Right, so what the hell was all that about? Well, let me explain. I've picked up this iPad keyboard case from Hong Kong. It comes in a box like this. Inside the box are the keyboard case and a USB charger cable. The iPad slips inside the lid of the case like this and clips in place and ends up creating something that looks a little bit like an Apple Macbook Air. The keyboard operates in much the same way as any other Apple iPad Bluetooth keyboard case. The first thing you have to do is to sync it to the iPad by holding down the Bluetooth button and then typing the code that appears on the screen into the keyboard and pressing enter, and then it's synced. The keyboard layout will be familiar to anyone that's used an Apple keyboard in the past, although it does have some additional buttons at the top which operate functions on the iPad. I'll just show you those now. The first button at the top left is the equivalent of pressing the home button on the iPad, and the next two buttons along adjust the brightness up and down. If we move along a little bit, we've got a button that operates the photo slideshow and then a button to operate the search. The next button along with the picture of the globe on it enables you to change the language of the keyboard. And then if we move past the media keys, we've got the volume up and down and mute and a lock key. One additional function alluded to on the back of the box is at number 6 here, DC out 5 volts 2 amps, and what that does is the internal battery inside the keyboard enables you to charge your iPad by flipping this second switch, which then sends power out and charges it up using the usual lead. And while we're talking about batteries, according to the specs that I've got here, the standby time is 6 months, the charging time is 5 hours, and the working time is 1600 hours, although I haven't actually verified that. So overall then, this looks pretty good. It's got the cutouts for the various different ports and sockets and switches that adorn the iPad. It's got rubber feet on the bottom to stop scratching your table. It's got these little rubber stoppers inside so that when you close the lid, or the iPad, it doesn't scratch the screen on the keyboard. And the keyboard has all the keys that you could possibly need on it. So it's quite possible right now that if you're an iPad owner, you're thinking, I wouldn't mind getting one of those. Well, just hold that thought for a moment because now it's time for me to burst your bubble. Okay, well, first things first, when I bought this it cost me about $71 and I bought it completely blind without any specs. Since then these specs have turned up and I learnt this to my cost. Unfortunately it's got a plastic casing. That's right, what you're looking at isn't aluminum or aluminium as we say in the UK, it's all plastic and it's nasty plastic. Just have a listen to it. The whole thing creaks like an old bed. It's not very well put together at all. It feels nasty to type on. The keyboard creaks and moves around and it's all flexible. And the fit and finish on the whole thing is pretty poor overall. I mean, just look at these USB ports, how they stick out on the side here. And then the next thing, you just try getting your iPad out of this once you put it in there. I mean, look at this. It's ridiculous. And you risk damaging your iPad, I think, by putting it in this case. And on top of that, the over-optimistic specs have the gall to suggest that the new thicker iPad would also fit into there, as well as the iPad 2, which I used for this review and I had to borrow off someone because my iPad wouldn't fit. The paint is already starting to flake off my keyboard in a few places, showing the black plastic underneath, so I hate to think what it would look like in a few weeks. And then you've got these keys at the bottom of the keyboard which only really work with OS X, not iOS. So these keys serve absolutely no function whatsoever when paired with an iPad. Now another problem with the keyboard is that it rocks around like this when the iPad screen is put at a sensible angle that you'd use for typing. If you were to put it vertical like this, the keyboard's quite steady, but you wouldn't have it like that. You'd have it a bit more like that, which makes the whole thing rock around in a rather irritating way. And because of the weight of the iPad, it's got this nice self-closing mechanism. And then there's one final thing that I'd like to point out, and that's the fact that all iPad keyboards are incredibly irritating to use anyway. And it's because of the fact that you have to keep tapping on the screen and then going back down to the keyboard to type something and then going back to the screen again to select something else. It really gets tiresome very quickly. Now, of course, that's not a problem that's specific to this iPad keyboard. It goes for all of them, and therefore I think it's something that you should bear in mind if you're even thinking of getting an iPad keyboard, because it might not be the thing for you unless you're going to be typing an awful lot of long documents. But what I'd suggest is stay away from this one if you are getting an iPad keyboard and look elsewhere. But anyway, for the moment, thanks for watching.